Here is the ear we are going to work on next, a profile view of an ear. Before drawing it, we might ask ourselves, what geometric shapes could we use to represent it? What simple forms encapsulates it entirely? If I had to choose one, I would use a rectangle to enclose this entire ear. And from this rectangle, we could define the different lines and angles using the blocking technique, which helps structure the drawing. And with just a few lines, we would already have a well-established outline. For this drawing, we will work directly with these contours of the blocking technique and angles. I think we can do without the rectangle, but if you feel it will help, don't hesitate to use it. Now that we have covered the basic shapes for drawing the ear, let's focus on the internal contours that we need to work on. When we look at this ear, we can see that there are many internal contours that help define the different shadow areas. The ear has a lot of volume and recessed area with a hollow, so it's important to mark these lines when drawing it. However, to notice about this contour is that some are sharply defined, while in many other areas the forms blend into each other. This creates what is called hard and soft edges. Hard edges where elements are clearly separated, and soft edges where shadows merge smoothly together. A common mistake when drawing an ear is trying to outline all the different zones too distinctly, but if we carefully observe the reference, we can see that this is not the case. Some areas have well-defined edges, while others are only separated by soft shadows that gradually transition into one another. So when working on this ear, we need to balance sharp contours with soft transition to create a natural and realistic look. In red on the photograph, I have marked the sharp contours that will be represented by clear lines, while in green I have indicated the soft edges, the soft contours where shadow areas blend into each other. One important observation is that in some areas, such as the upper part of the ear, a sharp contour with a red line starts clearly defined but gradually fades as it moves downward, merging with the surrounding shadows, and therefore becomes a green line. This means that when shading our subject, we need to pay close attention to this transition, starting with a clear, defined edge in some places and letting it softly disappear into blended shadows in others. Properly managing these variations will help create a more realistic and natural rendering of the ear, because one of the common mistakes made by people is to have sharp edges in the entire ear. So be careful to that. Now let's take a closer look at the shading. If we examine it carefully, we can see that this area contains numerous highlights scattered throughout the ear. The reason there are so many highlights is that the ear has a lot of reliefs and recesses, creating multiple areas of light and shadow. And because of this complex structure, light reflects off on many different surfaces, resulting in a large number of highlights. Alongside these highlights, we can also observe several lighter areas as well as darker patches where the value gradually becomes deeper. It's important to carefully analyze this variation and transitions in value to ensure accuracy in shading. Additionally, some areas of the ear will be significantly darker. While I haven't made a specific distinction between the different dark regions, we need to pay close attention to this. If we zoom in on the reference image, especially in the hollow part of the ear, we can clearly see that there are very dark areas with different values. I've illustrated this by zooming in on this section, and using different shades of blue, we can see just how many value variations exist. This is something we need to be mindful of while shading. So that's about it and for this section of the ear, and it's already quite a bit of information. Now let's get started by drawing the contour of the ear first. Let's get started with this ear drawing. We can sketch the ear using straight line to establish its overall shape. If we wanted, we could begin with a rectangular geometric shape before refining the angles. However, in this case, the structure isn't overly complex, so we can work directly using the block-in technique, breaking the form down into the different angles we observe in the ear. Once I have done that, I refine the lines. However, what I notice is that some elements aren't properly aligned when comparing them to the reference photo. This means I need to make some adjustments. So I compare the ear in my drawing to the reference image and realize that the straight line extending downward is better positioned slightly to the side. So I'm going to modify it. Like right here, I think it's better. So now I can erase a little bit this element, and I'm going to start to draw the inner contours. There's a long line that I can now trace, and one thing to note about this line is that the spacing between this line and the outer edge remains fairly consistent from start to finish. It's almost the same width everywhere. From this inner contour, I can start to add the other elements. For example, I can add this curved line right here because I know I try to locate where it starts exactly on this first inner contour I drew. Then there is the shadow area that is on the right side and almost at the top that I can add, and then move with this one, and I compare the spacing between this line and the first one, the first inner contour we drew, and step by step this is how I progress. And if I feel that some elements are off, not placed exactly where they should be, then well, I modify it. But I think we are pretty good with the different contours and different elements of this ear, and if some adjustments need to be done while shading, well, I will modify them, because when we shade everything, we can see that some elements might be a little off, and so we can modify them. We can still modify them. So that's the advantage of the pencil. Now let's start shading our ear, and what we will notice is that this upper part is really very light. So I will begin by applying a basic HB shading. It seems like a good idea to keep this area rather light as a starting point. Then I will gradually shade all the different areas, always asking myself which pencil will be best suited for each zone. For that, we can use our value scales if we wish. Here I notice that there are other elements in this section next to the area I shaded with HB that are going to be darker. So for this, I switch pencils and use a 2B. Then there's this slightly curved area that I had drawn earlier, more darkness and deeper shading. So I realized that the 2B might not be the most appropriate pencil. So I switch to a 6B and shade this entire area with my 6B, since the value remained fairly consistent in this part. Next, there is also the shadowed area on the side of the ear, which is quite dark. However, I won't shade the entire area with the 6B, because as we move towards the left, the shadow gradually lightens, so I have only shaded a small portion for now. Now I'm going to move on to the hollow part of the ear. This area has a lot of depth since it is recessed. To create this depth, it is important to carefully work with the different shades of gray available. When we closely observe our reference, we notice that the values are not uniform everywhere. There are many subtle variations that need to be taken into account to achieve a strong sense of three-dimensionality and effectively render this hollow shape. So at this point, I am shading the darkest area with my 6B, applying a bit of pressure on the pencil. Then I can shade the rest of the area with the 6B again, but this time using a lighter touch on the pencil. Now, still using my 6B but with a lighter touch, I can shade next to this area which was already quite dark. As mentioned earlier, the entire area doesn't have the same value. So now I have switched to a 2B pencil and I will shade the areas between these darker sections where the tones appear slightly lighter. In this case, 2B seems to work quite well. At this point, we have established the darkest element found in the ear, so I will continue progressing through the area, shading all the elements that seem important to darken with 2B. Then between these areas there are some lighter sections, so I will come in with an HB pencil. Once that is done, I will use a blending stump to smooth everything out, ensuring that our pencil strokes are no longer visible. This will allow us to refine the shading further with more precision before working on the texture of the ear. So now, with the blending stump, the challenge will be to ensure that each element stays roughly in place, keeping the light areas bright and the dark areas well defined, preventing them from bleeding too much into the lighter section. To achieve this, I blend using circular motions across the entire area with my blending stump, as the circular motions help me to have a better result with my blending. Now that all my shading has been blended, I can refine the details area, the shading areas more precisely, and adding subtle elements that are less visible. For example, in this shadowed area, we can see that some parts are slightly darker, especially on the upper section and the right side. On the lower part, there's a kind of line visible, but it shouldn't stand out too much. The transition between the shadowed area and the element on the right needs to be smooth and natural, so I will make sure to blend these elements together. However, on this upper part of our shading, there is a distinct line separating the shaded area from the lighter zone above it. You can also see this clearly in the reference photo, as I have emphasized it. With my pencil, I am going to emphasize some darker elements, particularly in this hollow area. We initially had a good base shading, but I feel that this recessed area doesn't stand out enough, so I need to add darker details. At first, we apply the general shading layer, but sometimes it is necessary to adjust it later to enhance certain elements or to bring out details that weren't prominent enough. In this case, we can also observe that the ear contains many small shadowed areas. When applying the initial shading, we focus on the primary shadows, the ones that stand out the most, so it's a little bit difficult to include all these smaller elements right from the start, and that's why I am adding them right now. Right here, for instance, we had a shading done with the 2B pencil, but as I am progressing, I feel that now my shading isn't standing out enough, so I am readjusting it. So it's not a shame to readjust the elements you have done. It's best to take the time to have a critical look at what you have done and make the necessary adjustments so that your drawing looks best. To make the ear stand out even more and ensure it closely resembles our reference, I am also going to add shading around it. The surrounding area consists of hair. However, I don't want to spend too much time drawing individual strands since that's not the focus of this lesson. Instead, I will apply a fairly dark shading all around the ear. This will help me create a more objective comparison with the reference photo. Having dark elements next to what we are drawing can influence how we perceive the different values, so it makes sense to mark them in. Finally, I am going to blend all the additional shading we have just applied. This will allow us to move on to refining the details of the ear, finalizing the drawing and working with more precision. And as we progress in creating our artwork, we can see how the drawing becomes increasingly refined, bringing us closer to the final result we are aiming for. If you are enjoying this video, know that there are many more waiting for you. On my website, you will find dozens of hours of real-time drawing lessons. We cover all the main topics, the fundamentals to get started, portraits, the human body, animals, and perspective to build entire scenes. Each tutorial is guided from start to finish, as if you were drawing right by my side. You will learn how to correct your mistakes, how to gain precision, and give more strength to your drawings. So if you want to improve and explore all these drawing courses, click on the link in the description. Otherwise, let's get back to this video. Now it is time to work on the ear and refine the details further. I am going to add small pencil touches here and there. For example, along the entire edge I want to darken certain areas a bit more. I also want to add some texture to make it clear that it is skin. This is skin. To achieve this, I will add these small marks that mimic the natural pigmentation of the skin. If we closely observe real skin, we notice that it's not uniform. It contains small pigments and subtle variations. By incorporating these details, I can create a more realistic texture. These texture details I am adding now won't be blended. I will only use the blending stump again if I feel that the shading in a particular area needs adjustment. However, when working on texture as I am now, I want these pencil strokes to remain visible, so I will leave them as they are once I am done. Next, I will reinforce this shaded area to create a stronger contrast with the section above it, making this part stand out more. Using my pencil, I will refine the shading while simultaneously enhancing the texture. I also work on the small shadowed areas in different spots which help smooth the transition between elements, and little by little, the area will take shape and reach its final form. This work we are doing to refine our shading and add slight variations in value, even in very small area, is very important. One of the common mistakes we often see when people draw ears is that their shading tends to be too uniform, with only a single value in certain areas, and as a result, the soft transition between light and shadow aren't properly developed. It is essential to work with subtle gradients, and these require careful attention to shading. Observing the different values in the photo, in the reference photo, and then in our drawing is very crucial. This issue is also closely related to another common mistake: overly defined contours, inner contours. The edges, if the edges are too sharp, the ear won't look realistic. In reality, we don't see many distinct outlines because most elements blend into each other. That's why there are very few strong, visible contour lines in the structure of the ear. Another important point to mention, I think, is that the ear is one of those elements in a drawing that is often overlooked but remains essential, especially when viewed in profile where it becomes much more visible. While the ear is not the focal point of a portrait, a well-drawn ear adds realism and credibility to the entire face. On the other hand, if it is neglected, even though it may not be the main focus, it will still stand out as something that feels off. That's why it is important to take the time to draw the ear properly. Despite being a secondary element, it has a complex structure due to the lack of clearly defined lines. Instead, what makes an ear look realistic is the careful work on the transitions between shaded areas. Mastering these subtle shifts in values is what ultimately brings the ear to life in a drawing. Sometimes you might see me going over the same area 2, 3, 4, or even 5 times to adjust the shading. It's true that it can feel a bit tedious to keep refining certain elements, but that's the price to pay to ensure our drawing looks truly realistic and has the right values. At first we might think the shading looks fine, but once we compare it to the surrounding areas, we realize it needs improvement. And that's exactly what I have been doing in different areas throughout the process, constantly adjusting to get the best possible result. Now I am going to add all these very light elements that we have in some areas. So for that purpose, I'm going to use my eraser pen. So you can see that on the left side of the ear right there, we have something pretty light and that stands out a little bit. And it stands out because of the hair that are pretty dark and that we added before. And I'm going to look for all these very light elements that we have in the area, using this to be accurate enough. So there are actually quite a lot of very light elements in these different areas, and the reason for that is because, well, the ear has a lot of volume and hollow areas throughout the entire area, so therefore there are a lot of highlights in many different areas. So I am adding them with this eraser pen. Later on, I will use the kneaded eraser because some areas will be a little bit lighter, but not as light as the highlights I am adding right now. And the kneaded eraser helped me to soften a little bit my pencil strokes, but allows me to have something not too light as well. So that's why the kneaded eraser will be pretty good. And I shape the kneaded eraser to make sure I have something pretty precise and to work with a tip that is pretty thin to erase just some small elements. So that concludes this video. I really hope you enjoyed it and that it was helpful. And if you'd like to take your skills even further, I truly encourage you to join us on the website mentioned in the description. You will get access to all the drawing and painting courses to help you make real progress in your artwork. So thank you very much for watching, and I will see you very soon in the new video.